Hello and welcome. I'm Bio, and today we're looking at the Mahjong and the Mahjong 2. This is CasRev. CasRev is an abbreviation of the term casual review. It's a term that I came up with myself. Mahjong 1 and 2 are part of the SIMPLE1500 series, specifically the SIMPLE1500 series Vol.1, the Mahjong, and the SIMPLE1500 series Vol.39, the Mahjong 2. First, we're going to be looking at the Mahjong. Upon booting up the game, we can see that it's brought us to a title screen. The two options you see on display here are Continue and Start Again. The one on the left is Start Again, and the one on the right is to Continue. The game, as far as I'm aware, is developed by Chat Noir and is published by D3 Publisher and came out in 1998. Upon initiating a start, you're brought to a screen that basically asks you what the general rule set you want the game to be set up in. How do I know this? I run it all through the Yandex translator from Japanese to English. The image translator, which seemed to work for the most part. I'll give you an example. Here you can see the partial translation, but it's not great. But it gives you an idea of what potentially these options can be. As you can see here, I can gather from my experience with Mahjong, this is the rule set, setting what kind of rules that you want the game to have. Next, we move on to the game itself. It's pretty simple, but as is the nature of the SIMPLE1500 series. You can see here we have a simple green background and simple tiles in a 2D style. The pixel art is very nice, and the tiles are nice and clear and easy to read, which is a lovely feature. Now, you may or may not be familiar with the game Mahjong, so I'm going to give you a small but brief experience with the game. If I could compare the game to Texas Hold'em. In Texas Hold'em, which I'd hope that maybe you potentially know the game, it's more common. In Texas Hold'em, the goal of the game is you get dealt 2 cards. Then 5 cards appear on the table and are flipped up once per turn. Correct? Something along those lines. And you've got to make the best hand possible with the cards that you have. If you have a pair, you can then join it with another pair that's on the board. If you have a pair of aces, it's going to be the pair of kings that another opponent could have. Mahjong is similar in a sense that you are dealt tiles, and you've got to make the best set of tiles out of what you're dealt. And that is basically what Mahjong is. I'm not going to move forward and say an in-depth analysis of what the game is like, simply because there are better places on YouTube to watch tutorials and such things. Personally, I would recommend picking up a book. There's a book on Amazon you can get called Richi Mahjong, the ultimate guide to Japanese game that... Let me say it again. The Ultimate Guide to the Japanese Game Taking the World by Storm by Scott D. Miller. It's the book that taught me how to play Mahjong. When you pause the game, it comes up with a menu to give you 4 options. These 4 options, from what I can tell, are check score, various settings / options, exit game, and close menu from top to bottom. Checking the score basically just gives you an idea of what the score is currently amongst all 4 players. The options, from what I can tell, give you the option to go through and pick various different options, such as what color tile do you want, what color background do you want, and what background music do you want to currently hear. Here's a rough translation of such things. For example, the game can look like this. Doesn't have to be green necessarily, but can be different colors, depending on your, obviously, preference. And that is all the options that the game offers, thus relishing in the title of Simple that it has been given by D3 Publisher. The general controls are as the circle button, as is most with most Japanese games, is the action button in the game. Use the circle button to select and discard which tile you want to get rid of. You press down on the D-pad if you want to do a separate, different action. If there's nothing you can currently do, it will simply display how many tiles are left to be drawn in the game before the game is over, or in this case, the round is over. For example, the flashing tile you just saw there, and there again, is giving me the option to do a chi or a pawn, which I don't want to do. In this case, you can see I've pressed down on the D-pad and it's giving me a second option besides showing me how many tiles there are left to draw, allowing me to re-chi. Again, very, very simple options. The only difference than a normal game is that Start doesn't bring up the option menu we saw previously. Instead, Triangle brings up this option menu, similar to what you would expect in an RPG. So, I said I wouldn't give a general consensus of how to play Mahjong, but what I can do is give a rough idea, based on a hand that I can draw. For example, have a look at the hand I've currently got. I'm currently cycling through, and I've just re-chi'd. The opponent to my right has just played the tile that I need to win, allowing me to run. Thus, as you can see here, if we have a look at my hand briefly, it might look confusing at first glance, but in reality, it's very simple. The Japanese kanji that you can see, with the red symbol underneath, are one set of tiles that you can have. You then see the green and red bamboo tiles, and the blue and red circle tiles, or they have various names, but I refer to them as the circle tiles. In this occasion, what you need to do to win the game is to have 4 sets of tiles and 1 pair. But you cannot get those 4 sets of tiles yourself. Not always, but you can on occasion. That's what makes the difference between a ron and a sumo. Ron is winning off of someone else's tile, whereas sumo is winning off of a tile that you've drawn yourself. With the tiles you see before you, out of the Japanese kanji at the far left, you see a 3, a 4 and a 5. That's one set. You can have a 1, 2 and a 3, a 2, 3 and a 4, 3, 4 and a 5, 4, 5 and a 6, and so on. Then after that, the tile you can see is the 3 of a kind. 3 Japanese kanji that are identical. Those are 9s. The Japanese kanji for the number 9. I have 3 of those. That is also a set. 3 of a kind can also serve as a set. I also have 3 of a kind when it comes to the 5 of bamboo. Then I have 2 8s of bamboo, making a pair, and then a 6, 7 and 8 of circles, making a complete hand. In this occasion, this hand was worth 12,000 points. Pretty good. But there are other factors in the game that make it so that you can win and get higher point hands. But again, I just want to give a general idea of how to win in the game. I'm not here to teach you how to play. I'm not qualified to do as such. But to give a general idea of what the Mahjong is like on the PlayStation 1, it's a decent little Mahjong game. It's simple, and that's all you really need with a Mahjong game. Plays well, and the sprite work is very nice. Makes the tiles very clear to read. With that, let's move on to the second game that we're going to be looking at. And that is the SIMPLE1500 series Vol.39, the Mahjong 2. The Mahjong 2 was developed by Warashi and released in the year 2000. As you can see here, the title screen is a little bit more going on with it than the previous game, but the options are still the same. As you can see here, after putting it through the Yanderex, from the beginning and from now on is basically start from the beginning or load up a save, just like the previous game. But this game has a lot more options going forward. This is the main menu. The main menu, as you can see, has a lot of options. Keep in mind that the Mahjong, or the SIMPLE1500 series Vol.1, did not have a main menu. You press start, chose your rule set and went straight into the game. In this game, there is a lot more going on. I put through all of these options through the Yanderex translator to get an idea of what all of these options are. So, let's go through them together. So this is what it gave me when trying to translate all of the options. Difficult, right? But luckily, by going through them all individually, I was able to find out what each of these options meant. And from what I can understand, as you can see at the very top it says main menu. The option after that is free versus. Then the second option is points quiz, which we'll get to in a minute. The third option is records. The fourth is a list of possible winning hands. And the final fifth option, as you can guess from the data collection at the bottom, is the save/load function. This, if you don't know what this screen is taken from the second option, which I told you was the points quiz. Selecting one of these options basically goes through how much a certain point is worth in a hand. To give an example, I will skip forward to a point when we have this menu. As you can see here, it shows you all the different points that you can get. Different hands, you could say. And you've got to guess what that potential amount of tiles is worth. If you don't get it wrong, you get a big cross. So, from what I gather, this second option is an ability to basically familiarize yourself with what tiles are worth what in terms of the point system, which the point system is fairly complex in itself, and even I haven't mastered it, mainly because I only play Mahjong in the video game form, not in real life, and thus the point system is automatically calculated in the video game. If we move on to the third option, you can see here with the third option, it brings up a screen with like a percentage sign. I assume this means that there are certain unlockables in the game that you can get, and it shows what percentage you have gotten of the unlockables. Like I said, the mode, roughly as far as I'm concerned, translates to records. It's stuff that you collect in the game from playing the game, as well as how good you are at the game. Just to give an example, if I scroll through all of these translated phrases, which I translated quite a lot, you can see here it's asking for the cumulative performance, the home winning percentage, and the supreme and in service. Again, it's a rough translation, but from what I can get, this is basically giving you an idea of how well you're playing the game, as well as how far you have in terms of unlocking certain things. Thus, why you have all these little question mark boxes. The fourth option is, as I said, a list of possible hands that you can get. Going through it, as you can see here, it shows one hand that you can get. one winning hand, and thus that's the reason why option 4 is a list of possible winning hands, allowing the player to familiarize themselves with what hands can lead to a win. Hands such as Chitotsu or 13 Orphans, just to name a few. And like I said, the fifth option is very simply save and load, as well as a few other extra options. So let's go into the game itself. Now, I personally am not a massive fan of how this game looks in comparison to the previous game, mainly because the game looks a lot more blurry than I'd like it to. Certain tiles look a little bit more difficult to read than they did in the previous game, simply because they've decided to go with a much higher resolution for the tiles than they did in the previous game. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's bad, it's just a design choice that they've gone with that I personally find to be lacking. But regardless, you can still play the game without really any issue as long as you already know how to play Riichi-style Mahjong. The controls are identical to the previous game, such as the circle button is the action button. Pressing down on the D-pad tells you how many tiles are left and also allows you to make further moves such as Riichi, Pon or Chi. And then the triangle button brings up a menu. The menu in question is very similar to the previous game. But I will have to say, considering that this second game has a lot more to offer the player in terms of not only checking what score certain pairs and sets and triplets make, as well as allowing the player to see what winning hands are available, makes this game superior to the previous, the Mahjong. And thus I would say, if you had to play between the two, I would recommend this game. But I would understand if you would wish to play the first game just on the style alone, and if you wanted to just get straight into the game without any delay. Or any fluff, you could say. So I will say that both the Mahjong and the Mahjong 2 are fairly decent Mahjong games in their own regard, and thus would recommend them to anyone who wishes to play any kind of Mahjong video game who already is familiar with how to play. As a little side note, as I stated, if you do wish to learn how to play Mahjong, I would recommend the book that I said about earlier in the video. But there are other ways to learn. There is a fairly lengthy tutorial on YouTube that you can find. It's about an hour and a half to 2 hours long that goes through everything. As well, if reading is not your thing. Certain video games also can teach you how to play, such as the Yakuza series, but I find that the tutorials that they offer in the game to be somewhat lacking and not as in-depth as I'd like them to be. I have been BioBlame. This has been CasRev, casual review of both the Mahjong and the Mahjong 2. I hope you have enjoyed the video, and I hope to be making more videos like this in the future, where we take a casual look at a video game that I am either quite fond of, or maybe not. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you again.